When I was younger, I used to think becoming attractive would make life easier. Not perfect, just easier. I thought making connections would feel more natural, social situations would feel less intimidating, confidence would come naturally. And maybe part of the reason I believe that is because I was quite introverted growing up. I wasn't the popular girl, I wasn't the girl who walked into a room and immediately got attention. If anything, I feel like I grew into myself much later. The older I got, the more I figured out what suited me, how to present myself, how to take care of myself, and because of that, I got to experience something interesting. I got to see how differently people treated me before and after. Now, to be fair, some things did become easier. As I got older, I figured out what suited me, became more confident, and yes, I started receiving more attention. First impressions became easier, social interactions felt a little smoother, people seemed more open before they knew anything about me, at least initially. But what surprised me most wasn't the attention, it was everything that came with it, because nobody really talks about this part. Nobody talks about how becoming attractive doesn't just change the way you see yourself, it changes the way other people see you. And sometimes those two versions don't match at all. I've noticed that people often assume they know who you are before you've even opened your mouth. The funny thing is that most of us know we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and then we do it anyway. I've experienced this in small ways over the years. For example, I've always loved wearing red lipstick simply because I think it looks beautiful, but over time I noticed people weren't just seeing lipstick, they were attaching an entire personality to it. Suddenly, I was bold, intimidating, maybe even arrogant. If I wore natural makeup and softer colors, people seemed to perceive me as friendlier and more approachable. The moment I switched back to red lipstick, it was as if the story changed. Nothing about me had changed except the color on my lips, yet people often seemed to think they were meeting a completely different person. That's when I started realizing that attractiveness isn't only about how you look, it's about what people project onto you. The more people notice you, the more they start creating stories about you in their heads, and sometimes those stories have very little to do with who you actually are. I think this is why becoming attractive can feel surprisingly lonely at times. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't expecting that. I thought becoming attractive would make connection easier, not more complicated. Not because people dislike you, but because people often interact with their idea of you rather than who you actually are. And this doesn't only happen with romantic attention, it happens everywhere. In friendships, workplaces, and social circles. I've noticed that some women are immediately warm while others seem distant before we've even spoken. That's not every woman, of course. I met plenty who are incredibly kind and supportive, which is why I don't think attractiveness automatically creates competition, but I do think it can amplify insecurities that were already there. Sometimes it felt like a decision had already been made before we've even had a conversation, as if I had unknowingly entered a competition I never signed up for. For a long time, I didn't understand it. I kept thinking, did I do something wrong? Because when we're younger, we tend to assume everything is about us. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that most of the time, people are reacting to their own insecurities, experiences, fears, and assumptions, not necessarily to you. One of the most freeing realizations I've had is that not every reaction is your responsibility. You can't control the stories people create about you, and shrinking yourself rarely changes them anyway. People who are determined to misunderstand you will usually find a reason to do so. That realization changed something for me. Sometimes I wondered whether I should tone myself down just to seem more approachable, but eventually I asked myself, if someone is judging me before they've even met me, is that a relationship I want to build my life around? The answer was no. I don't want to attract people who only accept a watered down version of me. I want to attract people who accept me as I actually am. And I think that's a lesson many women eventually learn. The goal isn't universal approval. The goal is alignment. Another thing nobody tells you about becoming attractive is that attention isn't always flattering. This is something I think social media gets wrong a lot. There's this assumption that attention automatically feels good, that more attention equals more happiness, more confidence, more validation. But attention is only enjoyable when it's wanted, and that's a very important distinction. I remember years ago, I was working in a place where one of my coworkers became increasingly interested in me, and the younger version of me didn't even fully realize what was happening at first. In my mind, I was simply being polite, friendly in a way you would naturally be with a coworker. But over time, the interactions became more frequent, more personal, and I started realizing that we weren't experiencing the situation in the same way, and that was uncomfortable. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I suddenly found myself managing a dynamic I never intended to create. I worried about creating tension, I worried about making the workplace awkward, so instead of addressing my discomfort, I carried it. Looking back, that experience wasn't really about attention, it was about boundaries. Becoming more visible often means becoming clear about what you welcome into your life and you don't. And if you're not used to setting boundaries, that can feel uncomfortable at first. And that brings me to another misconception. The idea that attractiveness and confidence are the same thing. Over time, I realized they're often completely separate. I've met beautiful women who were deeply insecure, and I've met women who wouldn't fit society's definition of beauty at all, yet somehow became the most memorable person in the room, not because of how they looked, but because of how they carried themselves. Attractiveness isn't purely genetics. Of course, appearance matters, let's be realistic, but so much of attractiveness comes from how you carry yourself, your confidence, your self-respect, the way you treat yourself. Some of the most attractive people I met weren't necessarily the most beautiful. They were the most comfortable being themselves. And I think that's what we're all really responding to, not perfection, authenticity, presence, self-acceptance. Because when someone truly accepts themselves, other people can feel it, and maybe that's the biggest lesson becoming attractive taught me. I used to think beauty was about being seen, but what I eventually realized is that being seen is the easy part. Being perceived is where things become complicated. People will create stories about you before they know you, and some of those stories won't be true. The challenge isn't trying to control those assumptions, it's staying true to yourself despite them. Because the more comfortable you become with who you are, the less energy you spend trying to correct other people's perceptions. Some people will misunderstand you no matter what, so you might as well be yourself. I'd be really curious to hear your experience with this. Have you ever felt like people created an idea of you before they actually got to know you? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.